So, Graham, we've had about a good 20 minutes of wallowing in the issues of the arguments for inaction, because all the arguments for action seem to be so complicated.
At least for military action.
That's right. But our colleague Joe Nye taught me much of what I've learned about these issues, is always advocating soft power and has written some books on that subject. Is there a U.S. use for soft power in this case?
Well, that's a good question for our class here. What do you think? Who's got a view?
Jess?
Well, I think it's very tricky in this case because one of the things that you rely on in using soft power frequently is the idea that you're somehow popular or influential, and we're not entirely sure in this case that sort of U.S. influence perceived as such is going to be a good thing. So I think if we were going to try to use soft power in this case, it would potentially have to be a reimagined and slightly even softer version of soft power.
And remember,
we're certainly more popular and influential than Assad. So I mean, who wants to be like Assad?
Well, but again, there's the difference between using power to get people against Assad versus using it to get them unified behind something else and something that's productive for us.
Yeah, what would be an action? I mean, if you were said, okay, give me the soft power option, what does it look like?
The most obvious one is a more aggressive, assertive diplomatic effort, which we sort of have the framework for in the Geneva II conference that the U.S. and Russia have been putting together over the last 6 months, where ideally they would get both sides to come to the table, once those sides are defined, of course, to come to Geneva and hash out some transitional government. But that's easier said than done.
Well, when struggling with the question of, okay, so if this is not a very good idea, what other good idea do you have? One way to do, or one clue, is to look around and see who else has addressed this issue and what they've advocated. So if we think about our readings or stuff that you've read elsewhere, who else has got an idea out there proposing something to be done?
At least one piece that I think is that a lot of scholars and observers have noticed is that the linchpin, the key to any diplomatic effort or negotiated settlement is Russia. And because they're the key backer, diplomatic backer behind the Assad regime. And so you're almost doing a two-fronted diplomatic effort, one with the Syrians and one with the Russians, to try to get them to come to a peace where they feel comfortable enough with going forward with the transitional government that leaves out Assad, where their interests are still met.
So
well,
how's that?
That's
how's
going
that
great,
working
don't
out?
you think?
Yeah, exactly. And of course, this is it's not an easy thing to solve.
Well, I think the hard truth here is that if you thought that the road to a solution, to a politically negotiated solution in Syria ran through Moscow, then you might have to be more accommodating to Moscow on other things than in order, because Moscow's not going to do this.
Mm-hmm.
Putin is not doing this because he's a nice, friendly, helpful person in general in international relations. People do something because they get something. So how would you compare, what would you be prepared to do or to give up in order to try to induce a more cooperative U.S.-Russian effort to get it negotiated?
I'm not going to give a satisfying solution, but if we go back to the Bosnia case, there's actually somewhat of a comparison with Slobodan Milosevic, who was at the time sort of looking for an out by 1995, when the military pressure on the Bosnian Serbs was pushing them to the brink. He was looking for an out, but he also wanted to get something in return, and that was essentially the promise that he would stay in power in Belgrade and be given all of his privileges.
But in this case, you can't give Assad that.
Well, I mean in the Russian case.
Right. You can't, obviously, you can't give it to Assad. In Russia's case, of course, Russia's got a military base, its only military base outside of Russian territory in Syria, and you could make a guarantee that they could keep that, but whether you could enforce that guarantee may well depend on what the future Syrian state looks like, and we have no idea.
Yeah, but I mean, again, if your principal objective were simply to stop the killing or to suppress it to the maximum extent, it's conceivable that if you're willing to think about a partition or a substantial decentralization of power in Syria, maybe Assad and the Alawites can stay in their region. And so, again, I mean, these are lousy choices, each one of which seems worse than the other one, but we're not doing very well where we are now.
Well, certainly not, and that gives you a sense of the complexity of this issue, because what we've quickly determined is we don't want boots on the ground, that we think that arming the rebels may be insufficient and we may be arming the wrong people, and that the key to this is to get other neighbors or others with interests there, starting with Russia, involved at a moment that our relationship with Russia is probably as bad as it's been at any point in the past decade. So it really
So-
does tell you that, you know, everything really is connected.
That's right, and as a friend of mine in government likes to say, after I've criticized all the things that he's doing and the absence of imagination and the unwillingness to lead and sort of futzing about, he says, okay, so you're so smart, what would you do?
Well, probably not a bad place to end this segment, because the strategic options memo for Syria is all about what you would do.
Those of you who are joining us on the web will have already been grappling with this case. For those who are applying to be among the 500 who are participating in the Harvard online classroom, you will have actually submitted your one-page outline of a strategic options memo. So the segments that follow will unpack this problem and will provide some more material that you can think about as you contemplate how you answered the question and how you might answer it after you've thought about it somewhat more.